You step back out onto Slaughter Lane, and the morning feels heavier now. Not darker, exactly, just thicker, like the air is holding its breath. You walk slowly past the shuttered stalls and hanging herbs. The butcher didn't say much. They never do on Thursdays. But somehow, you still feel like you learned something. Farther down the lane, you find a cart with one broken wheel and a pile of turnips sitting beside it. Someone's drawn a smiling face on the largest one. It's unsettling. The turnip seems to be watching you. A baker leans out from a nearby doorway, flour dusting his eyebrows like snow. "Looking for meat?" he asks, smirking. You nod. He shrugs. "Not today." Then he adds, "Unless you're after ghost ham, in which case, head down to the chapel." You're not sure if he's joking. You never are with medieval bakers. Too much yeast, too many secrets. Instead, you turn down a smaller alley that curves toward the town square. The stones here are smoother, worn down by carts and centuries. The scent of salt and iron grows stronger, mingling with rosemary and tallow. You reach a courtyard, modest, shaded and quiet. At the center stands a tall wooden post, notched and stained. Hanging from a hook is an old apron, bleached almost white by sun and time. It flutters slightly in the breeze. A man sweeps the ground nearby, thin, older, with hands like dried bark and a hunch that speaks of years over a chopping block. He sees you looking at the apron and smiles just barely. "You're not from here," he says. You confirm. He nods, as if that explains everything. "Thursday," he says, tapping the broom handle once on the stone. "Used to be the busiest day, before the guild changed its mind." You ask why. He pauses, then says, "Blood ran uphill that day." You don't ask him to clarify. Something in his tone suggests it's not meant to make sense. Or maybe it makes too much. Instead, you sit on a nearby bench, and he continues sweeping. Your second historical fact: in several 14th century English and Flemish towns, butchers were formally restricted from slaughtering animals on Thursdays by local trade ordinances. These weren't just moral guidelines, they were enforced by the guilds of butchers, often backed by the church. The reasons varied. Some claimed it was a day of rest for the animals, a remarkably selective kindness. Others believed it conflicted with certain saints' feast days, and in some towns, Thursdays were market prep days. Meat was forbidden so that vegetables could be sold first. But whatever the reason, the rules stuck. And when rules stick in medieval towns, people start creating stories to explain them. You glance up at the chapel bell tower nearby. It hasn't rung in over an hour, which feels off. You ask the old man with the broom about it. He chuckles. "Used to ring when the first cow fell, before they stopped the slaughter." You raise an eyebrow. "Oh, not for celebration," he adds. "It was to let the blood drains open." You don't want that pooling near the bakery. Right. Of course. Here's your strange cultural tidbit. In parts of medieval France, butchers were required by town statute to sprinkle holy water on their knives on Thursday mornings, even if they weren't using them that day. The knives were laid out in rows, polished and blessed, sometimes by a priest, sometimes by a guild elder, with very clean hands. This act was believed to prevent curses, accidents, or stubborn meat. In some cases, a few drops were even flicked toward the nearest cat, just in case. You look back at the chapel tower. A weather vane in the shape of a boar spins lazily on top. There's a small garden nearby, mostly herbs and overgrown rosemary. Someone's carved a pig's face into one of the stones and stuck cloves in for eyes. It's unsettling. Again, you start to notice a pattern. The old man finishes sweeping and sits beside you. He pulls out a cloth-wrapped bundle, bread, cheese, and a sliver of something cured and mysterious. He offers you some. You decline. He shrugs. "Wasn't butchered today, if that helps." You accept. It's salty, earthy, surprisingly good. He begins to tell a story, one you sense he's told many times before. It's about a man named Ulrich, a butcher's apprentice. Young, eager, and dangerously skeptical. One Thursday, Ulrich decided to prove the superstition wrong. He arrived early, slaughtered a lamb, and sold the meat before noon. That night, every cat in the quarter gathered in front of his door and yowled until dawn. The next week, he tried again. A storm broke over the market and struck his cart with lightning. No one else's, just his. The third time, he vanished, or moved to Bruges. Depends who you ask. Historians still debate whether these Thursday taboos were functional, folkloric, or fabricated after the fact. Some say they were created to preserve meat freshness for Friday fasts. Others point to earlier pagan traditions that treated Thursdays, named for Thor or Jupiter, as days when bloodshed was ill-advised. Whatever the origin, the rules remained, and the butchers obeyed. You finish the bread and brush crumbs from your lap. The wind picks up slightly, and the old apron sways again on the hook, ghostly, pale, proud. You thank the man. He nods, then adds, "Be careful where you step after midday. Some stains don't lift." You smile politely and back away slowly, just in case. As you walk back into the broader market, you notice a change in tone, a little more movement, a few stalls reopening, people emerging from doorways. It's as if the town collectively held its breath and is only now beginning to exhale. And still, no fresh meat in sight. The sun rises slowly over the market square, as if it too would rather stay in bed. You walk carefully along damp cobblestones, boots catching on the occasional straw scrap or peach pit left behind from the day before. A dog trots past with a loaf of bread in its mouth. No one chasing it. Not today, not on a Thursday. You pass through a narrow street where the stone walls lean together like gossiping neighbors. Wooden signs creak overhead, one carved into the shape of a tankard, another like a pig's head, mouth frozen in a wooden oink. You're not sure if that's charming or ominous, probably both. Today the market is quieter than usual, not empty but restrained. There's a hush in the air that's thicker than the fog, and though you haven't seen a single butcher yet, you know they're here, somewhere, avoiding your gaze, pretending to be busy, moving just a bit slower than usual because it's Thursday. And in this particular town, in this particular stretch of the 13th century, Thursdays are considered inconvenient. For some, unlucky. For others, dangerous. But for the butchers, Thursdays are downright haunted. If this sounds dramatic, that's because it is. Butchers, as it turns out, had a long and very peculiar relationship with Thursdays throughout parts of medieval Europe, especially in towns where trade guilds and church calendars collided in curious, unexplainable ways. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. If you enjoy soft, slow storytelling and unusual old customs like this one, we invite you to like this video, subscribe for weekly sleepy history, and leave a comment with your local time and country. We love seeing where tired minds are tuning in from. Now, let's step into the quiet heart of a medieval butcher's quarter, where the knives are sharp, the meat is fresh, and no one wants to talk about Thursday. You pass under a low archway and enter the alley known as Slaughter Lane, which is frankly not the best branding. The name was earned honestly though. This is where the town's butchers used to bring their livestock to be processed. That was before the edict. Before the whispered warnings, before someone tried to work on a Thursday and, well, we'll get to that. Today the lane is washed and mostly clean. There's a wooden cart loaded with straw, a basin of water slowly overflowing into the street, and the faint scent of salt meat and yesterday's worry. A boy runs past you with a bundle of herbs, lavender, sage, and something pungent you can't name. He ducks into a doorway marked with a red crescent moon and slams it behind him. You follow more slowly. Inside, the space is cool and dim. Wooden beams, hooks and wax candles line the walls. A man stands behind a table, hands folded, staring at a large cut of beef like it just insulted his mother. His apron is spotless. His tools are arranged with religious precision. And he is very, very deliberately not cutting anything. Not today. Here's your first historical fact. In many medieval towns, especially in parts of France, England, and the Low Countries, Thursday was considered an ill-fated day for butchers to slaughter animals. This wasn't formal church doctrine, but it was often enforced by local guilds or customs, rooted in old calendar alignments, saints' days, or market rhythms. Some towns even had written rules: no slaughter shall be done upon the 5th day lest misfortune fall. What kind of misfortune? Now we're in the realm of speculation. The man behind the counter finally notices you. He gives a tight-lipped nod and gestures toward a small stool near the fire. You sit. A cat curls under the table. It watches you with that mix of boredom and judgment only cats and retired bishops can achieve. You ask the man, gently, cautiously, why the knives are still hanging. He doesn't answer at first. Then he says, "You ever seen a pig scream backward?" Pause. You blink. He doesn't explain. Instead, he points to a faded parchment nailed to the wall. The ink has run, but you can still make out the first line. "Let no blade fall on a Thursday, for blood drawn on that day shall not wash clean." Was this law? No. But in towns like this, it didn't have to be. Tradition, especially in trade guilds, was stronger than most statutes, and butchers, despite their bloody work, were often among the most ritually cautious of medieval workers. After all, they dealt with life and death, with knives and entrails, with judgment from both bishops and bakers. Here's your first strange cultural tidbit. In parts of medieval Germany, butchers hung iron charms shaped like ears or hooves above their doorways on Wednesdays, specifically to protect them from Thursday accidents. These were polished weekly, blessed monthly, and buried at crossroads if they cracked. No one remembers why. Historians still debate whether this Thursday superstition began with a religious origin, perhaps tied to certain saints or market feasts, or if it emerged from older pagan lunar calendars, where Thursday was aligned with unlucky omens for cutting, carving, or drawing blood. The lack of clear written law has led to more folklore than clarity. You warm your hands near the fire and listen to the faint creaking of beams above you. The butcher doesn't resume work, but he does pour you a ladle of broth from a pot simmering in the corner. It's spiced, earthy, and tastes faintly of onions, marrow, and something harder to name, like caution or memory. You sip slowly. He says nothing, but the cat blinks once, as if to say, "You're beginning to understand." Outside, the bell in the abbey tower chimes the hour. The butcher flinches. The knives on the wall remain still, and Thursday rolls on, careful and quiet as a shadow. The market square is starting to wake up. Slowly, cautiously. You hear the squeak of an ox cart wheel in the distance, and someone's opened a window just wide enough to toss out yesterday's dishwater. A chicken is pecking at something invisible on a doorstep. Everything feels normal, but just underneath, you can tell Thursday still holds the town in a soft grip of unease. You pass a wool merchant rearranging his display for the third time, though no one's buying. You pass a girl chalking symbols onto the stones near the curb. Nothing sinister, just little spirals and fish shapes. She says they keep the meat from spoiling. You nod. You don't ask. You follow a narrow street that bends like a question mark, turning past a well, then beneath a heavy stone arch marked with the image of Saint Bartholomew, patron saint of butchers, and famously flayed alive. You try not to think about that part too much. You've entered the Guild Street, where the town's meat workers, fishmongers, tanners, and soap boilers do their business, and it does smell exactly like you think it would. Salt, hide, blood, smoke, all of it softened, today by the absence of any real work. There's a strange silence to it. Tools are set out but unused. Aprons are hung but unstained. A pot boils on the edge of a cart but no one standing near it. You stop outside a narrow wooden shop with a faded boar painted on its door. A small sign says, "Purveyor of clean blades." You knock once, twice, then push gently. The smell of steel and cloves greets you. Inside, it's dim, but inviting. The walls are lined with knives. Some gleaming, some ancient, a few still showing the dark patina of stories no one tells anymore. A woman stands behind the counter, polishing a cleaver with a cloth that's seen better centuries. She doesn't look up. You're not here for sharpening. You admit that you're not. She finally glances up. Her eyes are sharp, her expression patient. "You're here about Thursday," she says. You nod. She sighs, gently sets the cleaver down, and gestures to a stool beside the stove. "Sit, then." It's a long story, like all the good ones. Your historical fact of the hour. In many medieval towns, butchers were required to belong to formal guilds, which had their own oaths, penalties, codes of cleanliness, and workday restrictions. These guilds had powerful sway over local markets, prices, and most importantly, reputation. And while Thursday bans were rarely written into royal law, they often appeared in guild charters, especially those maintained by scribes trained in church doctrine. Some were vague, using language like "let the blade rest on the fifth day." Others were explicit. "No slaughter on the day of Thor, lest the flesh sour and bring shame." Which raises a question: what exactly did they think would happen? The woman behind the counter explains. "There's a reason no one sharpens on a Thursday," she says. "Edge won't hold, handle might split, steel goes soft." She shrugs, as if acknowledging how ridiculous that sounds, and yet, I've seen it myself. You give a man a freshly honed knife on a Thursday, and it's nicking his thumb before the first cut. Or worse, the animal slips. The blood sprays sideways. That's a sign. A sign of what? She pours tea, doesn't answer. Here's your strange cultural tidbit. In some towns, Thursday was known among butchers as the talking day. No blades were used, but stories were shared, often about knives that moved on their own, or fat that never cooled, or customers who demanded pork on a day no pigs would die. Some butchers spent Thursdays cleaning, storytelling, or even singing to their tools. It wasn't exactly superstition. It was ritual, a kind of keeping the knives in line. In a German folk tale from the late 1400s, a butcher is cursed after sharpening on a Thursday. His knives begin to whisper to one another. A week later, his best cleaver refuses to cut. It simply turns in his hand. No one explains how a cleaver refuses. But again, no one questions it either. You sip the tea. It tastes like mint, sage, and a hint of pepper. It warms your chest but not your hands, which still feel oddly chilled. Maybe it's the knives. Maybe it's the stories. The woman begins to sort through a drawer of small bone-handled blades, all labeled in careful calligraphy. You ask why she keeps them so well organized. She says, "Because if you can't trust a butcher's blade, you'd better trust his stories." Historians still debate whether these Thursday taboos were driven by economic necessity, like giving animals a rest before Friday's Christian fast, or if they were simply reinforced by fear and coincidence, repeated over time until everyone forgot where the rule ended and the myth began. Even the guilds that wrote the rules couldn't always explain them, but they enforced them anyway. Outside, a bell rings. Not the church bell this time. just a merchant's cart announcing potatoes, but it breaks the silence, just slightly. A few shutters open. The sound of a stool scraping wood echoes down the lane. The woman glances out her window. Not long now, she says. By dusk someone'll try it. They always do. You ask what happens. She looks at you, eyes tired but amused. Well, she says, that depends who's watching. You thank her for the tea. She nods, sets the blade back in its drawer, and returns to polishing. You leave the shop quietly, stepping into the late morning air, where Thursday is still thick and wary. The square has shifted again. A few more carts, a few more feet on stone, but no meat. Not yet. You walk past a puddle that smells faintly of iron and time, and you wonder just briefly if the stories really are just stories, or if the knives know something you don't. By midday, the shadows in the square begin to change shape. Not longer, just softer, like they're relaxing a little. The town exhales again the way it always does when noon passes and nothing bad has happened. Yet, you sit at the edge of the square on a short stone wall, nibbling the last of a crusty roll you bartered from a fishmonger who clearly didn't want to talk about sausages. A trio of children skips past, holding sticks and shouting about dragons. One of them wears a bucket on her head. You make no comment. To your left, a large man in an apron is silently rearranging crates of turnips into increasingly defensive formations. You've seen no beef, no lamb, not even a chicken leg, but you have seen at least 6 different displays of root vegetables. It's a strange kind of confidence. You decide to follow a different street now, one you haven't walked yet. It winds behind the church, past a crumbling low wall lined with chipped gargoyles, and ends near a narrow footbridge that crosses what's generously described as a stream. A large goose glares at you from the other side. You glare back. Neither of you moves. Eventually the goose relents. You cross and find yourself in front of a small stone building marked with a sun-faded crest, a cleaver overlaid on a book. The sign below reads, "The Bucker's Library Records of the Guild, Recipes and Reports of the Unfortunate." How could you not go in? The door creaks open with polite reluctance. Inside it's cool and dim, the kind of quiet that holds its breath between pages. Wooden shelves line every wall, stacked high with parchment scrolls, recipe books, dried herbs, bundled quills, and an alarming number of labeled bones. A sleepy man with half-moon spectacles looks up from his desk, squints at you, and gestures vaguely toward the back. "Thursday," he mutters. "They always come on Thursdays." You take your time. The room smells like old leather, rosemary, salt, and wax. You pass a section labeled Brining Experiments 1280-1341 and another titled Records of Meat Judgment. You're afraid to open anything with that name. Eventually, you reach the back of the room, where a low table is stacked with loosely organized parchment tied in twine. A nearby sign reads, "UN-verified incidents. Handle with respect," or gloves. You pull out a bundle and untie it carefully. Today's historical fact: many medieval butcher guilds didn't just keep ledgers of sales and inventories, they also recorded ritual practices, folk stories, and strange events, especially if those events involved injuries, accidents, or disputes tied to slaughter days. In some cities, these were called entries of caution. In others, they were called fleshwood notes. They were half history, half superstition, but they were treated with a seriousness that suggests they mattered. You read incident number 16, Borough of Middlemead, 1313. On a Thursday, one Arnold the oxman did lay blade to a sow of reddish colour, though warned thrice by his master. The beast let out no cry, but did collapse, and a streak of blood did mark the door of the neighbouring cooper's house. That night, the baker's flour soured and the chapel mice stood upright. It's written in perfect, clear hand, like it was completely normal. You read another, incident number 41, Lower Laneford, 1294. A boy named Bart cut meat on a Thursday as a dare. He was not maimed, but the sausage turned green. Dog refused it. Cat ran in circles. The bishop was notified. You blink, gently put the parchment down. Choose not to read a third. Here's your strange cultural tidbit. In some towns it was common to blame Thursday cut meat for a wide range of misfortunes: food poisoning, spoiled trade, even bad dreams. Some households refused to cook or even store meat that had been Thursday touched. This led to entire sections of town relying on dried fish and cabbage, one day a week, not out of fasting, but out of fear. Some butchers, trying to get clever, labelled their meat as Wednesday's work, and just didn't say otherwise. These efforts didn't last long. Customers always knew. Somehow, they always knew. The man behind the desk coughs softly and speaks without looking up. "We have recipes too," he says. "But no one ever wants the Thursday ones." You ask why they were kept. "Because you have to write it down," he replies. "Or else it gets louder." He doesn't clarify. You don't press. Historians still debate how seriously these fleshwood records were treated. Some argue they were ritual fictions, exaggerated to reinforce guild authority. Others believe they were oral warnings, written down only when enough people agreed something strange had happened. But no one denies the sheer number of incidents involving meat, knives, and Thursdays. Some are too strange to ignore, others are too strange to believe, and many fall right in between. You leave the library quietly. Outside, the wind has picked up. A few clouds have gathered, thick and low. You pass the goose again. It's still glaring. You nod. It hisses. You accept the draw. Back in the square, you notice someone walking briskly across the lane with a basket of herbs and what looks suspiciously like a bundle wrapped in butcher's cloth. You watch. He disappears down an alley. No one else reacts. You follow, at a distance. The alley ends in a shaded courtyard behind the fishmonger's stalls. There's a small table, a knife, a fire pot, and a man standing over it. He's unwrapping the cloth. You duck behind a barrel. You don't mean to spy, but Thursdays have a rhythm, and sometimes that rhythm says, "Hide." From your hiding spot behind the barrel, you can just make out the man's hands. They're steady, careful, practiced. Not quite the hands of a surgeon, but not the hands of a thief either. He unwraps the cloth with reverence, like he's opening something sacred or cursed. Inside is a leg of lamb, perfectly prepared. No bruises, no rot. Fresh, too fresh, because it's Thursday. He doesn't glance around. He knows he's alone, or maybe he's just decided not to care. His cloak is dark and frayed at the hem, typical of a man trying not to be recognized in a town small enough that everyone knows everyone anyway. He reaches for a curved boning knife. No sound, no hesitation. He tests the blade on his thumb. just pressure, no blood, then begins to cut. One slice, two, three. You expect something to happen. Thunder, a scream. Maybe the clouds to weep. But nothing does, just the whisper of steel on meat, and the sound of your own breath in your ears. You stay still, not because you're afraid of being seen, but because you're afraid of what it means if nothing happens, or if something does. Then, he drops the knife, just lets it fall. It bounces once on the wood and lands near his boot, blade clean. He stares at it. He stares for too long. Then calmly, he begins to pack up the meat again. No explanation, no panic, just silence. You step out slowly, not to accuse, just to speak. He looks up, no surprise on his face, just that same heavy calm. You saw, he says. You nod. He shrugs, felt like testing it. You ask if he believes the stories. He smiles, not kindly, not cruelly, just tired. I believe in hunger, he says, and I believe in Thursdays. I'm not sure they believe in each other. Historical fact, in at least 2 surviving guild charters from the Low Countries, dated 1357 and 1412, it's noted that members caught slaughtering or preparing fresh meat on a Thursday shall pay a double fine, and their goods be set aside until Saturday. Some charters even named Thursday a non-market day for flesh, distinguishing it from fishmongers, who were allowed to operate. In essence, this wasn't just superstition, it was guild-enforced pause, one that prioritized rest, tradition, and sometimes superstition under the name of regulation. It didn't matter whether you believed it. It mattered whether your neighbor did. The man kneels to retrieve the knife, and winces, not in pain, but with annoyance. The handle has cracked, not badly, just a fine split. He turns it in his hand, frowns, then drops it in a leather pouch, as if it's no longer useful. You see, he mutters. You ask what that proves. He shakes his head. Nothing. Everything. Depends what time it is. Here's your strange cultural tidbit. In some towns, especially parts of Brittany and Western Flanders, butchers kept small bowls of salt under their tables, on Thursdays, but only if they weren't working. It was said to absorb the spill, even if no blood was shed. The salt was never reused. It was poured into crossroads before dawn the next day. One chronicler wrote, "To butcher on Thursday is to unbutton the day. Let salt take it back." No one explains what that means. But everyone copied the sentence into their ledgers anyway. The man stands, tucks the bundle under his arm, and gives you a long, unreadable look. "Tell them if you want," he says, "but you won't need to." You ask why. He gestures to the knife handle again. That's all he says. Then he walks past you, down the alley, and disappears into the soft gold haze of the afternoon. You sit for a while beside the small fire pot. It smells faintly of lamb fat and rosemary. A pigeon flaps overhead, unsettled. A few droplets of rain fall, not enough to matter, just enough to notice. And then the bell rings. Not the church bell, not the merchant bell, a smaller bell. From the northern side of town, you stand, because that bell, as you've been told, only rings when something is done that shouldn't be. You follow the sound, weaving through narrow streets and uneven cobbles, past shuttered houses and watching eyes. A dog barks, a window closes, a cat darts under a wagon with something in its mouth. You arrive at a small square, framed by 5 timber-framed homes, all leaning slightly inward, like they're afraid of what just happened in the center. There's no crowd, just a bell tied to a pole, and at the foot of the pole, a pale cloth, damp, red at one end. No one says anything. A woman walks past, sees the cloth, and mutters, again, then she's gone. Historians still debate the meaning of these bell rituals in smaller towns. Were they warnings, announcements, acts of penance? In some regions, the ringing of the butcher's bell meant someone broke tradition and slaughtered on a forbidden day. It didn't call the town to arms. It called the town to silence, to remember. In one record from 1430, a scribe wrote, "The bell tolled before dusk. The house was closed by morning. Meat left on the step was not touched. None spoke of the lamb again." You walk back to your inn slowly. The town is quiet now, not dead, just contemplative. A town remembering a rhythm it didn't invent, but still obeys. Thursday still has hours left in it, but the feeling has shifted again. Not fear, not guilt, just quiet knowing. You enter the inn. The fire is low, and a stew simmers on the hearth. You don't ask what kind, you just sit, warm your hands and listen to the wood crackle. The innkeeper walks by, eyes your damp sleeves, and says, "Out late, eh?" You nod. "See anything interesting?" You pause. Then a broken handle. He nods, doesn't press, just refills your mug and moves on. Evening comes quietly to the town. There is no fanfare, no bells this time, just the slow hush of shutters closing and footsteps softening on cobblestone. Lanterns glow behind thin panes of wavy glass, and smoke rises gently from crooked chimneys. You sit by the inn's hearth, wrapped in a wool blanket that smells faintly of mint and firewood. The stew you ate was rich and quiet, the kind of meal that doesn't demand conversation. You still don't know what meat was in it. You've decided that's for the best. Outside, rain begins to fall, soft and rhythmless, just enough to darken the stones and send cats under carts. You glance toward the corner of the room where a small framed page hangs above a sideboard. The ink is faded, but you can make out the heading, "Against cutting flesh on the 5th day, as told by Master Willem, Keeper of Knives, 1369. A strange thing to hang in an inn, but then again this town has its rhythms, its silences, its Thursdays. The innkeeper brings a candle and sets it beside you. "Rain's picked up," he says. "Good night to stay inside. Better than ending up like Ola." You ask slowly, "Who was Ola?" He raises an eyebrow. "You haven't heard." You shake your head. He settles onto the bench across from you, rubs his hands together, and sighs. "You won't like it," he says. Then he starts anyway. "Ola was a journeyman butcher. Didn't belong to this town, just passing through. Thought he'd make a little money on the side. Bought a lamb cheap from a miller, on the edge of town. Took it to the back of the stables and cut it on a Thursday, just before dusk. He didn't even hide it. By morning, all the milk in the northern quarter had turned. Bread didn't rise. And Ola, well, he was found asleep. Not dead, just asleep, for 3 days, wouldn't wake. No fever, no injury, just curled up beside the lamb's remains like he was dreaming of a better choice." You ask what happened to him. The innkeeper shrugs. "He left, walked out of town with bare feet and never said a word. Might have joined a monastery, or a fishery, or the pigs. No one knows." He stands, pats the table and says, "We don't carve on Thursdays. Not because we're afraid, but because we've paid attention." Then he walks away. You lean back and listen to the rain tap the window. You're not sure if the story is true. You're not sure it matters. Historical fact. There are a number of documented suspensions of butchery activities tied to specific days across medieval Europe. Some towns banned cutting entirely on saints' days. Others issued fines for working on Fridays, holy days or the eves of major fasts. But Thursdays are strange, because they don't appear on church calendars. They're not fast days, not feasts, not tied to any universal liturgy. And yet, in pockets across England, France, Flanders and the Rhineland, Thursdays were set aside, sometimes quietly, sometimes officially, for non-slaughter. Scholars have proposed everything from lunar cycles to pre-Christian leftovers to social crowd control. The truth? Likely a mix of all of it. And the people of these towns never really needed the reasons. They had the stories. You decide to take a short walk before bed, just to clear your head. The rain has stopped. The streets glisten. The town feels like it's holding its breath in sleep. You wander back toward the butcher's quarter and find a small crowd. They're gathered around the edge of a cart. Wooden, iron-rimmed wheels. Nothing fancy, but in the center, lit by a single torch, is a small crate. Inside the crate is a goose, very much alive, very much annoyed. One man gestures to it and says, "It followed him." Another adds, "Wouldn't leave the stall until he stopped cutting." You catch the name, Hegwin, a junior butcher, ambitious, too clever for his own boots. Apparently Hegwin tried to test the curse earlier that afternoon. Just a quick chop, nothing dramatic. Then this goose showed up, refused to leave, honks every time he picks up a blade, stared directly at the marrow knife, and hissed for 3 hours. Someone whispers, "It's the same goose from 5 years ago." It remembers. You decide not to ask how they know that. Here's your strange cultural tidbit. In some towns it wasn't just about avoiding butchery on Thursdays. It was about watching for signs. Animals acting strangely, bread that didn't rise, salt that refused to dissolve, a cracked egg, a mirror fogging the wrong way. In fact, some guild ledgers include pages titled Thursday watch marks, listing things like a sow yawning before dawn, blood that smells of apples, a fish blinking twice. Were these omens, explanations, or just ways to cope with a world where not everything had a reason? You look at the goose. The goose looks at you. You decide you've had enough folklore for one evening. You return to your room at the inn, light a second candle, and sit for a moment before bed. There's a quiet in the town that isn't peaceful. It's not hostile either, just watchful. The kind of quiet you get when everyone's agreed not to speak something aloud. Not because it isn't true, but because it might be. Historians still debate whether Butcher's fears were about Thursday itself or the consequences of breaking rhythm, of crossing a line too many times, even when that line doesn't seem to exist in law or scripture. Sometimes tradition holds things that logic never could, and sometimes you don't cut on Thursday because it's Thursday, and that's reason enough. You sleep soundly. At least you think you do. The inn's wool blanket is scratchy but not unkind. The air smells faintly of candle smoke and rosemary, and when you wake once in the night you hear nothing. No bells, no footsteps, not even a goose. Just stillness. In towns like this, stillness is a kind of language, especially on Thursdays. Morning arrives as a grey yawn through the shuttered window. No golden burst of dawn, no rooster declaration, just a slow lifting of shadow and the sense that the town is beginning again, quietly, carefully. You dress slowly and step into the hallway. A maid passes with a stack of linens that smell like mint and old ash. She nods, then adds under her breath, "It's Friday now." Like that explains everything. In the common room, the fire is out, but the bread is warm. You sit near the window and eat in silence. Across the room, two older men are discussing something in low voices, words like gull, knife, and no one warned him. You don't ask, you finish your bread, wipe your hands, and return once more to the butcher's quarter, just to see what's changed. What's changed is subtle. The shutters are open, knives have returned to hands, The air carries the sound of bone on block, steel on wood, and a faint humming from one of the shop fronts. A cleaver strikes, no thunder follows. A stall displays raw pork. The sky does not open. It is Friday, and the rules have shifted. You walk past a stall where a woman is setting out cuts of beef wrapped in waxed cloth. She sees you looking and says, "You can always tell when it's not Thursday." No one's whispering. You smile. She adds, "We never waste a Friday." Not after holding still that long. Then she returns to her work, slicing with care, folding with quiet pride. Your historical fact. In towns where Thursday restrictions existed, Friday was often the busiest day for meat markets. Customers came out early. Butchers worked quickly. Salt and spices ran low by midday. Butchers would sometimes pre-cut and preserve meat on Wednesday, wrap it in cloth or cover it in vinegar brine, and only display or sell it on Friday. This led to the popular saying among merchants in Flanders. In some records you can even see references to meat debt. Butchers owed certain customers Friday meat that had technically been ready the day before but was held back for fear of curse, fine, or worse. You walk past a new stall selling sausages in neat little loops. A child runs past with one in each hand, grinning like she's stolen treasure. Her mother yells something about breakfast first. The street smells richer today. Oil, garlic, thyme, and the unmistakable sharp scent of fresh fat rendered fast over a hot fire. Thursdays are about waiting. Fridays are about catching up. You duck into a small shop with painted red trim and an illustrated pig in a bonnet above the door. Inside, the butcher is humming. She's wearing a white apron dusted with flour and blood, and she's folding leaf fat into a pastry crust. You compliment the smell. She grins. Tie day. You ask if she ever breaks the Thursday rule. She stops folding and raises an eyebrow. Do you? You nod. Sometimes. We all do. She shrugs. Not here, not for that. The meat's different when it's cut on the wrong day. Smells sweet too soon. Ruins the crust. Here's your strange cultural tidbit. In some medieval recipe books, notably those compiled by monastic scribes, Thursday was referred to in code when it appeared in meat preparation. Instead of saying Thursday, the instruction might read, "Avoid the day that sings but does not feast," or "Let the fourth day pass in prayer, not in portion." Some scholars believe this was to avoid conflict with guild rules. Others think it was just a poetic workaround. But in some households it became common to refer to Thursday meat as ghost-fed, as in, don't eat that. It's ghost-fed. No one ever explains what the ghost was feeding. The butcher returns to her work. The crust is pinched with clean, practiced folds. The smell of seasoned pork and nutmeg rises around her like a kind of spell. You ask what happens if someone ignores all of it. The rules, the rituals, the rhythm. She doesn't answer. She just points her knife toward the window and says, "Ask him." Outside stands a man in a spotless apron. He's not selling anything, just standing, watching, and beside him, resting quietly on the edge of a display table, is a ham, a full bone-in leg, wrapped loosely in linen. He stands behind it like a statue, doesn't speak, doesn't blink. You approach slowly, ask if he's open for business. He looks down at the ham, then at the sky, then says, "It was cut yesterday." No apology, no drama, just fact. You ask why he's displaying it. Because someone needs to know how it smells. You sniff the air, and pause. It smells like nothing. And that's the problem. Historians still debate whether these stories, the dead meat, the ghost-fed, the talking knives, are rooted in experience, fear, or clever economic control. Some argue they were tools to enforce rest. Others think they were a way to slow down something as serious as butchery, to force reverence into repetition. One theory proposes that the restriction served no spiritual purpose at all, but rather kept the town from being overwhelmed with waste smell or oversupply ahead of feast days. Another theory, people just like their rules with a little mystery. You thank the man and step away. He doesn't move, but you notice that no one is buying his ham, and no one is telling him to stop. They're just letting it sit there, Quiet, still, unbought, you walk on, letting the town settle around you. The sound of market chatter is growing, knives are moving, bread is rising, the rhythm is returning, but you still feel the hush of Thursday behind you, like a coat you forgot to take off. It doesn't bother you, it just reminds you that even silence in a town like this has its rules. Later that day, you find yourself wandering the edge of the town, where the houses lean farther apart and the earth turns to wet moss underfoot. The sky is still overcast, but lighter now, as if the clouds have agreed to let a little softness through. You pass a man leading two pigs down a narrow track. One pig snorts at you. The other seems distracted by a butterfly. Neither looks particularly concerned about their future. You consider this a hopeful sign. A small wooden sign at a fork in the road reads, "Butcher's Grove, Guild Use Only" below it. In different handwriting, "Visitors welcome. Just don't bring knives." You follow the path. It winds through a thicket of hazel and yew, then opens into a clearing dotted with flat stones, low benches, and a long wooden table darkened by weather and time. Several worn aprons hang from nails in a nearby tree, as if this forest occasionally hosts meat-cutting ghosts who preferred good ventilation. At the center of the table sits a wooden box sealed shut with a brass clasp. A small plaque on the lid reads, "The Thursday box, to be opened only on the 6th day, by order of the guild. You're here on a Friday." That counts. You open it. Inside is a bundle of parchment, yellowed and curled. Not recipes, not fines. These are letters. Personal, scribbled, some signed with full names, others just marked with initials or ink blots. You take the top one and unfold it gently. "To whoever finds this, I cut a pig on a Thursday. The blade slipped. My cousin wept for 3 days without speaking. I am not saying the two are linked. I am saying I will never do it again. May your hands be wiser." You read another. "It rained blood only on my awning. Not the rest of the market, just mine. EF 1372. And another. "They said it was pork, but the butcher wouldn't swear to the day. I spit it out. The bread was better anyway." Unsigned. Here's your historical fact. Many medieval towns maintained unofficial spaces for ritual storytelling, often maintained by guilds but not written into civic law. Butchers in particular were known to record personal testimonies, not confessions but experiences. These stories were not evidence. They weren't punishable. They were warnings. Over time, they formed what some scholars now call the meat memory, an informal oral traditional archive of what not to do, when not to do it, and what to watch for if you did. These records often lived in places like this: groves, back rooms, attics, out of sight but never out of relevance. You set the papers back inside. You don't read them all. Some feel too private, others too cryptic. A few mention animals by name. One talks about a duck that refused to blink. You close the box, carefully. You take a seat on one of the benches and let the quiet settle around you. Here's your strange cultural tidbit. In some rural areas, butchers performed small rituals on the Friday after a forbidden Thursday cut, if they suspected the day had gone wrong. This could include burning salt mixed with rosemary and a drop of the meat's blood, placing the blade under a bowl overnight with a coin on top, or writing a single word on parchment and burying it under the nearest tree. The word varied by region. Some wrote forgive, others wrote done. One guild ledger simply says, write the name of the animal and cover it with earth. You close your eyes for a moment and listen to the breeze move through the branches. The pigs in the distance grunt once. A raven calls from a crooked tree. A cart rattles far away. There's no rush to return. You don't feel watched, but you do feel remembered. Historians still debate whether the Thursday prohibition was ever about the meat itself. Some suggest it was really about the people, reminding butchers who dealt in life and death to step back once a week, to think, to listen, to remember the hands they held the blades in, and the voices that warned them when not to. In a world ruled by pattern and scarcity, even small rituals had weight, especially the ones you couldn't explain. You rise from the bench and follow the path back toward the edge of town. The mud is softer underfoot now. The light through the trees is warmer. You spot a sprig of parsley growing wild near the fence and pluck it for no good reason. By the time you reach the main road, the town is busy again. The market is humming. Bread rises, fish sizzle, and the goose from yesterday, gone, vanished. Somehow you're not surprised. Back in town, the market has returned to its usual rhythm. People haggle over onions. A dog carries something vaguely meat-like through a puddle. Somewhere, a musician plays a three-note tune on a single-stringed instrument. No one seems impressed, but no one asks him to stop, either. You stroll past stalls filled with fresh cuts, stacked pies, and jars of preserved fat labeled with flourished handwriting. Someone has spelled sausage wrong on a chalkboard sign. You find that oddly comforting. A child is selling dried herbs out of a boot. Not a basket, a boot. Business is slow. You stop near a table where two butchers are debating something over a slab of beef. Their gestures suggest disagreement, but their tones are sleepy. One points at the meat and says, "It's too soon." The other shrugs and says, "It's already done." They see you watching. "You missed it," says the one on the right. "Missed what?" you ask. "The test," says the other. "Friday test cut. We do one every week." You ask what they were testing for. The first one leans in, lowers his voice and says, "Echoes." You raise an eyebrow. "Sometimes the meat talks back," he adds. You say nothing. He nods solemnly. "Exactly." You continue through the square. The smells today are layered. Garlic, pepper, brine, coal smoke and rosemary. But under it all is a faint metallic trace, almost like rust. Not unpleasant, just grounding. Someone is selling ox-tongue pie next to a table offering apology sausages at half price. You don't ask. Instead, you wander toward the public oven. The oven stands at the far edge of the market, a low dome of stone and soot. A woman in a patched cloak is pulling out a tray of hand pies, and she gestures to you with her chin. "These were cooked yesterday," she says, almost proudly. You ask why that matters. "Yesterday was Thursday," she replies, "but we only cooked. We didn't cut." Then she adds, "The filling was made Wednesday." No curses. You thank her and take one. It's warm, spiced, heavy. It tastes like a story someone wrote down in pastry. Your historical fact. In many medieval towns there was a distinction between preparation and slaughter. While Thursday might ban the act of cutting, some allowed mixing, marinating and cooking, so long as the meat had been cut in advance. This led to complex rhythms of work and rest, where a butcher might spend Thursday cleaning tools, salting hides, or even baking offal into pies. In one guild manual from Bruges, there's an entire section titled Thursday Work for Clean Hands, Acceptable Tasks on the Day of Pause. These included polishing knives without whetstone, stirring tallow, folding tripes, a process best left undescribed, singing old songs to hide drums. Yes, that's what it says, hide drums. You don't ask. You finish the pie and brush off crumbs. As you do, a small boy runs past you, clutching what looks suspiciously like a roast duck wrapped in cloth. You hear someone yell after him, "Not on my steps, I told you." Then a goose honks somewhere in the distance. You have questions. You choose not to ask them. You pass the guild hall again. Door open now. People entering and leaving. Inside, on a long table, are several scrolls and a single candle burning in broad daylight. You step in quietly. No one stops you. You walk to the edge of the room and read the note posted near the door. This hall acknowledges the fifth-day tradition. Those who honor it are not superstitious. They are careful. That's all it says. But that feels like enough. Here's your strange cultural tidbit. In some parts of medieval England and France, butchers created small charms made of pig's teeth, polished bone, or twisted twine, which they hung from their apron ties or tool belts on Thursdays, not for luck, but as a declaration, "I will not cut today." In some guilds, a butcher caught wearing blades without the charm was fined or sent home. The charm was a mark of participation in the tradition, and also a soft way to tell customers today's not your day. One French charm was engraved with a single word, "attend." Wait, pause, not now. Outside, the bells ring softly for evening mass. The town begins to close again, slower now but with purpose. Aprons are folded, stalls are covered, bread is set out to cool. No one mentions Thursday, because it's past, but no one forgets it, either. You walk back to the inn under a sky that's gone lilac and soft grey. Chimneys smoke lazily into the air. Someone is burning rosemary again. You can smell it on the wind. At the inn, the maid is wiping the windows. She sees you and smiles. "Did you find what you were looking for?" You shrug. "Maybe." She leans closer and says, "My uncle once salted pork on a Thursday. He never said what happened, but he always salted it on Wednesday after that." Then she moves on. Historians still debate whether the Thursday fear was ever real. Some say it was a coincidence that grew legs. Others call it an oral tradition safety net. Still others say it was a way for people who dealt in blood to have one day where they didn't. Whatever the cause, the tradition remains in records, in ledgers, in lead-stained charms and burnt salt bowls, not because it was logical, but because some things don't need to be. Tomorrow, the market will buzz again. Tomorrow, the goose might return. Tomorrow, someone will sharpen a knife too quickly and nick their thumb. And no one will say it was Thursday's fault, but they'll think it, and that's enough. The next morning is bright, not loud or sharp, just gently golden. You wake to the scent of baking bread, someone humming near the window, and the flicker of firelight down the hall. You stretch. You move slowly. No rush. It's not Thursday anymore. Downstairs, the innkeeper offers you a small cup of broth and a slice of oat bread warm from the hearth. No words are exchanged, just nods. the kind of quiet understanding that only sleepy towns and superstition can teach. You eat slowly, sip slower, and listen to the soft knock of wooden clogs outside the inn. Then you rise and take one last walk through the town. The butcher's quarter looks different in the morning light. Not cleaner, exactly, just clearer. Knives hang from hooks, gleaming softly. Hooks sway a little in the breeze. Someone has chalked a smiling pig on a wall near the drainpipe. The pig has eyelashes. A small boy is bouncing a ball made of tied rags. A cat is ignoring him with absolute professionalism. Everything feels normal, which is to say, everything feels like itself. You stop at one of the empty stalls and rest your hand on the counter. The wood is smooth from years of elbows, baskets, and quiet transactions. There's a mark etched into the corner, a small spiral, not decorative, just there, the kind of thing someone carves while waiting, or listening. You trace it once with your finger, then you move on. You walk past the chapel, where a single bell chimes half past something or other. The priest sweeping the steps gives you a look that says, "Still here," and "Good choice," all at once. You don't stop to explain. No one needs to. Because in this town people understand things without saying them. Like why you don't cut meat on Thursdays, or why geese show up at inconvenient times, or why the best broth is made on Fridays with salt stirred counterclockwise. Your final historical fact. By the late 15th century, many towns with strong butcher guilds had official days of rest written into their internal codes. Thursdays were the most common. These weren't religious observances, but rather practical superstitions codified by practice. And often, though not always, they included strange rituals, private logs, and local folklore too specific to survive elsewhere. Some of these customs were inherited, others were invented, most lived somewhere in between. Historians still debate where this blend of myth, meat, and moderation came from, but no one denies the records, and no one forgets the stories, because Thursdays, especially in towns like this, are about more than the meat. They're about the rhythm, and about who dares to break it. Final wind down. Now the town is quiet again. Afternoon has settled in like a sleeping dog, warm, still, unconcerned. You hear the low hum of bees near a window, the flick of a broom against stone, a wooden cartwheel squeaking its way down a slope. The week continues. A butcher wipes his cleaver with a linen square, folds it and places it gently on a shelf. Not rushed, not afraid, just precise. A girl walks past carrying a basket of eggs. She hums a song no one taught her, but everyone somehow knows. A dog snoozes beneath a table, paws twitching, maybe dreaming of geese. And from a distant kitchen comes the smell of pepper, cider vinegar, and boiling onions. No one mentions Thursday, because there's no need to, but it lives in the way knives are set down a little slower, in the way salt is stirred just a little longer, in the way every cleaver is wiped, once, twice, and once again for good measure. That's how these things survive. Not in law, but in rhythm, in ritual, in the quiet decision to pause. And as the sun softens over the rooftops, and the river glows just a little gold, you find your way back to the inn. The windows are warm with candlelight. The cat has claimed your seat. You sit beside it anyway. And somewhere in the stillness, you fall asleep, before anyone has a chance to say good night.